welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Today's date is the 11th of May 2014. Welcome to all listeners. Truth Sentinel is now back in London after a number of weeks in Ukraine, a country which is rapidly deteriorating. As I was leaving Odessa, actually, in the taxi, there was crowds marching down the street, chanting. Apparently they actually went on to the police station and demanded some prisoners be released. Since I've heard things have quietened down in Odessa a bit, but I don't think it's over yet. Civil war seems inevitable. Today's news, still on the subject of Ukraine, pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine holding self-rule referendums. And apparently, according to the BBC, there are chaotic scenes at polling stations, with it being very badly organised. But of course, if you read Russia Today, then it will give you a far more positive view of events. And who's telling us the truth? It's probably somewhere in the middle, I would say. I would expect the result to be for East Ukraine to go towards Russia, and it will be interesting to see the reaction from Putin, who's distanced himself from this poll. More again on Ukraine later. Ceasefire has been violated in Sudan, only hours after it was supposed to come into effect. Hundreds of people across Vietnam have protested against China's role in a dispute over there on the sea. Apparently that's the largest rallies of their kind recently in that communist country. Other news this week. The Daily Mail in the UK printed yet another nauseating story about the Queen and how hard she works, and showing a photo with a caption underneath about her heavy tiara that she had to wear, which isn't, that heavy at all, actually. And if it is, well, how about just take it off then? It's not so difficult. She was attending some ceremony that happens every 8 years or so to award some or create some new knights. I don't know, it's all rather ridiculous. The article was commenting on her arduous long-haul flights abroad. Now, no offence, but if she was in economy class, fine. A long flight abroad could be quite arduous, but somehow I don't think her flights are going to be arduous. She's going to have 5-star treatment. She'll have the best food. She'll have probably a seat big enough for a queen to sit on, probably even a throne on there. Wouldn't be surprised. So, less of the arduous work she has to do, please. I mean, it's an outdated concept as far as I'm concerned, and only continues to be popular in the UK due to the continuous brainwashing of the masses that the Queen is good value for money, and the royal family, because of the amount of tourists they bring in. Tourists never get to meet the Queen, incidentally. And so this tourist service could be maintained at 1/1000th of the cost, just by having someone dress up as the Queen or something. I am being a bit flippant, but enough said on that anyway. Other news this week: Nigerian girls that were kidnapped. A lot of people jumping on the bandwagon now. John Kerry offers US support. President Obama and his wife Michelle are heartbroken. I really wish someone would comfort them, because I hate to think of Obama and Michelle heartbroken. I mean, they must be crying themselves to sleep. I really don't like it when they use those words like that cheaply, because I doubt very much if they're heartbroken. And maybe the families of a daughter who's been taken might be heartbroken. I actually find it hard to believe that Obama has any way of being heartbroken or showing empathy, because I say that after watching his speech after returning from Malaysia, where he joked about flight MH370, referred to it a number of times, and that was after coming back from Malaysia, so it's pretty insensitive. If he really cared about missing people, there was 239 missing passengers on that plane, so why is that such a big joke, something you can joke about at an after-dinner speech? Then he joked about NSA surveillance, like that's all a big joke, Actually, I and many other millions of people are actually really upset that he thinks it's fine for the NSA to spy on the entire world. What's his business? What I'm writing or what I'm saying on the phone or what I'm typing into my computer. It's none of his business, you know. I don't like him making jokes about it. Also joking about his healthcare reform, which I know isn't popular with a lot of people. And then, to top that, for his finale, joking about President Putin. You know, somehow I don't think in the years of Kennedy and Khrushchev, they would have been cracking juvenile jokes about each other, because they knew the seriousness of the situation they're in. We're on the brink of World War III, and he's making jokes about Putin's chest. I mean, it's just... I actually think we're in danger with him in charge. I think we're in danger. But I'm not just being talking about America. I'm talking about the UK as well. Cameron has also been saying some stupid things this week, also about the missing girls. And anyway, I mean, I thought Obama's speech was undiplomatic, unprofessional, and insensitive. But anyway, that's my opinion. What do you think about that? Let me know. And I mean, I saw Michelle's video as well. She was reading from a teleprompter. Now, if you want to sound sincere, or if you want to look sincere, it's best just to talk from the heart, you know. If you start just looking at words on a teleprompter, and it did seem like she was putting a fake I'm concerned face on. You know, politicians and their friends and partners tend to do. I mean, way more than 500,000 people go missing every year in the UK and the USA. You know, they're actually in a position where they can do something about that. So they're just using it for some political gain or for some reason, you know. I mean, I've heard they're going to be moving security services in to try and help, which probably means they're planning some kind of operation over there. I mean, Cameron said that he rang the Nigerian president to offer anything that would be helpful and agreed to send out a team of counter-terrorism and intelligence experts to work alongside the bigger American team that's going out there. I suggest they're out there for some other reason, or definitely for some ulterior motive, because the moment it seems like the president and other politicians care, it's the moment to be concerned. What are they actually up to? Putin visited Crimea this week and gave yet another display of Russian military power. Killer robots are to be debated at the UN. I think they're going to be discussing the ethics of whether automated killing should be allowed. It should be a very short meeting. The answer should probably be no. But I'm sure they'll draw up guidelines on situations where it's ethically right to kill someone with a robot. It'll probably start with exceptional circumstances a robot can be used to kill with someone, and then eventually, as laws are relaxed, which they always are, they'll just be picking people off on the streets. Other news of more of an astronomical nature: a sibling sun has been found 110 light years from Earth. That report from RT, Russia Today. The sun could have a sibling, according to researchers at the University of Texas. They believe this star was born from the same cloud of gas as our sun, and this could give astronomers fresh ideas on how life on Earth started. I'm fairly skeptical personally on that we know actually much about how life started, or much about the universe. I do think in this day and age we think we're a lot more intelligent than we really are, but that's just my personal opinion. Not everyone agrees with that, I know. We'll be looking to the skies for other parts of today's program. I also noticed on Twitter, my Twitter page, that a Colorado witness in Centennial reported seeing a silent missile-shaped objects with lights that moved toward ground level about late evening a number of days ago on May the 8th, I think it was, this year. And this came from the Mutual UFO Network, otherwise known as MUFON. And we're going to be talking more on the subject of UFOs imminently. Just to mention last week's episode. Remember, this is a weekly show. I do try to get this out within 7 days of the last one. It has sort of slipped a bit to different days. I know it used to be Wednesday, then Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It just depends on other work commitments as well. But I think I'm going to aim for the weekend. I think the weekend's a good time to do this, because there's I usually have some free time. We're getting more and more people on the Truth Sentinel team. We're getting researchers, sound people who've offered to help, and thanks for people that are contacting us to offer to help. Anyone else who can, please let me know. Any guests that would like to come on, please contact us. Last episode we talked about Ukraine. We had reviews on documentaries about PSYOPs, Glenn Greenwald, Edward Snowden. Then we had our guest Mark Cocking talking about the global banking elite, and there'll be more from him today. He'll be talking a bit more about that and also commenting on the weather. Remember to leave any comments in the comments section underneath the video on the Scott Sentinel YouTube channel. I've actually had to move channels, as I mentioned, due to a block from Caravan to Midnight. It's a misunderstanding, but you know, it has affected this channel. We've lost a number of listeners due to all the subscribers basically not seeing uploads. So please resubscribe to Scott Sentinel channel, which you should find information about on the previous Caravans of Midnight channel. And if you want to say hello or come and say hello on the show, please contact us. There's various ways to do that: Twitter, Facebook, and just contacting us via the email section on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about UFOs for the first time. We're just touching on this subject today. It won't be in depth, but it will be an introduction. And we'll be focusing a little on the silver orb or silver sphere phenomenon. There's different shapes of UFOs, as well as the saucer-shaped UFOs, and many people have also seen the silver orb style of UFOs. And there's a documentary, actually, if you want to find out more about it, called The Enigma of Flying Spheres. That's just one documentary, which you can find on a very good website called topdocumentaries.com. Another good website is documentaryheaven.com, where you can find lots of conspiracy documentaries and, well, just documentaries in general. Today we'll also discuss Ukraine and the ongoing media wars and the effect it's having on Ukraine. I can certainly I can give you some perspectives on Ukraine, having lived there for a number of years, both in West Ukraine and sort of more central, southern, eastern Ukraine, in Odessa. I've just returned from Odessa and still got friends on all sides over there. It's my opinion that it's really difficult to give an exact account of what's going on there, because there's so many parties involved, including Russia, the US, the EU, probably others, and secret services from those countries and more. There's a report on RT, Russia Today, and German media that Blackwater US troops are also on the ground in Ukraine. That certainly wouldn't surprise me at all. There's business interests playing a part. For example, Gazprom, of which Putin has at least a 5% stake, but probably more via friends. There is, basically, it's all about West Ukraine, which is fiercely nationalistic, and which a lot of people would say were responsible for the overthrow of the government of Yanukovych at the Maidan in Kiev. They mostly in West Ukraine speak Ukrainian, the Ukrainian language, and embrace all things Ukrainian traditions, etc. And there's some fine, decent people amongst them. It wasn't just Nazi fascist types that some of the news would have you believe. There's some decent people amongst them. But there are also the ultra-nationalists, who are less friendly and are linked to the killings in Odessa. Actually, I was there at the time. Most of that was caused by football hooligans. You know, it's not really, that wasn't so much about politics, in my opinion. You know, those football hooligans used to march down the street when I was working in the center of Odessa, and they never looked like the friendliest of people to me. They came from the Chorny Moritz football club. Anyway, East Ukraine is more pro-Russian, with Russian-speaking citizens, and there's a lot of trouble over there at the moment with the Ukrainian army staging attacks on whatever you want to call the people who've taken over institutions there. I mean, one person's insurgent is another person's freedom fighter. You know, there's pro-Russians, you could call them. It depends on which side you're on and what you want to call yourself, really. It's quite easy to upset people if you name them the wrong name anyway, so I'm not going to go there. I tend to just say pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian just because it's easier. I'm not really on a side myself, but I guess my views do side more on getting rid of criminal government. So initially I would say I supported the Maidan, but I don't know, things have changed since. I don't think it's gone quite the way I would have hoped it had gone anyway. I like criminal governments being replaced, but I don't know, I think the situation in Ukraine is far more complicated. Let's go to one of our growing team of academic researchers. We've got a number of researchers now, and hopefully getting some more too. But let's go over to one of our academic researchers today. Hi, Anthony. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm pretty well. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. Thanks. Not bad.
Oh, it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's nice to be back from Ukraine. You know, as I was leaving, there was hordes of people marching down the street, shouting things. So it seemed like it was a good time to go.
Were they shouting things at you?
No, I don't think so. They were actually looking towards the centre of Odessa, so I don't think it was anything I said.
Okay. You sure it wasn't "please don't leave"?
Well, I'd like to think so, but no, they didn't seem that jovial, to be honest.
So, listen, I wanted to talk to you a little bit this week about a situation which we're all familiar with. It's the situation in Ukraine. I know it's been discussed a lot on this program, but I just want to put in my 2 cents, if I may, and I want to get your reaction to it, because look, like you, I've lived in Ukraine. I lived there for a few years, but now I'm seeing the whole thing from the sidelines. So I'm just interested to find out what you think. The main thing I want to say about this war, and which I think is all but inevitable now, is that if a war happens in Ukraine, it's a very stupid war. And it's stupid for a few specific reasons. If you look into the factors which are bringing Ukraine closer and closer to war, there are a few things which really stand out. The first thing is socialization in Ukrainian society. And by that I mean, on both sides of the political fence, there's definite evidence that Ukrainians are socialized to be violent, and they're socialized to solve their problems through violence. Now, not everybody in Ukrainian society is violent. I'm not saying that. But there are definite cues, you know, that violence is a legitimate solution to problems in the way Ukrainian people are raised. They're also socialized not to listen to opposing points of view. And that's a really big problem.
When you say they're socialized not to... Because I have observed this. I totally agree with what you're saying. So... But have you found information that suggests that this is actually a learned process?
I'm looking at parental upbringing techniques, and I'm looking at the fact that there are Ukrainian schools in Ukraine and Russian schools. So in a city like Lviv, parents have to make a choice. Will I send my child to a Russian school, or will I send my child to a Ukrainian school? And in those schools, they're streamed into different views of society. But most importantly, Ukrainian children, I would like to suggest, are socialized to hate from an early age. Now, again, I don't say this is all Ukrainian children, definitely not, but definitely a significant percentage.
And what are you basing these beliefs of yours on?
Well, I'll give you one example. My wife is Ukrainian, and she teaches children, and she was in a lesson, a one-to-one lesson, individual student, some years ago, and the boy she was teaching was an ethnically Ukrainian 9-year-old boy. And in the middle of the lesson, the boy suddenly informed my wife that, quote, "I hate all Russians." This is a boy of 9 years of age. Now, that can only come from the schoolyard or from parents. And this is something which it's deeply disturbing. You know, from a very young age, people on the let's say Western Ukrainian-speaking side of the equation are told about the famines of the 1930s and told that Stalin deliberately engineered the famines in order to kill Ukrainians because his aim was genocide. That particular episode in history is very contentious, you know, but I'm not saying they're wrong about that. I'm saying it's debatable. However, kids learn this when they're kids, the way we learn fairy tales, you know. That Russians tried to kill them, all of them. On the Russian side, you hear about people like Stepan Bandera. Stepan Bandera, very controversial figure. He was the leader of a let's say, partisans army in Western Ukraine. And look, depending on your point of view, either fought with the Nazis because he was a fascist, or fought with the Nazis because he saw them as the lesser of two evils, as in Ukraine was stuck. You know, when Nazi Germany decided to invade the Soviet Union, this was effectively an invasion of Russia, with Ukraine stuck in between, and Poland as well. And so the other point of view is Bandera looked at the prospects of being occupied forever by Nazi Germany and the prospects of being occupied forever by Russia, and decided that that the Nazis probably weren't going to stay around forever and the Soviet Union would, and therefore sided with the quote-unquote lesser of two evils. That's one point of view. The other point of view is that he was a Nazi. I'm not saying which one is correct. I don't think it's for me to say, but I am saying kids learn this, you know, from a very early age, and they're told that in the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, they're told, or at least it's implied, that the Ukrainian speakers of today are the direct ideological descendants of that man and that movement. Now, if you're told that from childhood, then you're being told this at a time when your brain is still developing. So really, what's probably going to happen to you, unless you have an epiphany at some point in your life, you grow up believing that, and that is a huge problem. This is a phenomenon, by the way, that's well studied in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. School textbooks have been analyzed, and there was a report released last year saying that both sides vilify the other and teach a very dark view of the other in the primary school classroom.
And I've actually seen that well, on video anyway. There was a documentary that went inside the schools, and it was disgusting. In talking about the Ukrainian teachers that must do this, and in the Israelis and the Palestinians, I just think shame on these people. You know, whatever you believe, don't pass it on to the next generation.
Absolutely.
It's disgusting.
Absolutely. I don't think it's as overt in Ukraine as it is in Israel and Palestine, but I definitely think it's present in the upbringing of a lot of Ukrainian children, and I think it's really sad because it vastly reduces the prospects for either a peaceful solution now or a peaceful future for the country. The second problem in Ukraine is these information wars. The way information has been handled in Ukraine is just ridiculous. I'll give you a couple of examples of this. About a week ago, there was a rumor going around on Vkontakte, the Russian Facebook, that the Victory Day parade was going to be cancelled in Kiev, and that the government had ordered, or the government was going to order the military to shoot anyone who was wearing a Soviet medal, okay, in Kiev, in the city. That was the rumor that was going around. So
I think I'd heard some rumors like that. I've definitely heard either that rumor or similar ones whilst I was there.
Yeah. So let's have a look at the anatomy of this rumor. Some of the Victory Day celebrations were actually cancelled, as it turned out, for security reasons. And getting 50,000 people together in one place is probably a bad idea at the moment. But this is how the rumor started. There were a few veterans out on the street in Kiev, just sitting in a park, And they were having a big complaint, as you know, elderly people are sometimes known to do. They were having a big complaint about the government, and one of them said, "You know what? I bet they're going to cancel the Victory Day celebrations, and if we go out with our medals, we'll be shot in the head." Right? Mm-hmm. Okay, one Twitter user overheard the conversation and tweeted it. One user. The tweet was picked up by the office of Aksinov, who's the Prime Minister of Crimea now. His office just picked it up, right? And Aksinov is a provocateur. He's a bastard. He's a real troublemaker. He's not even in Ukraine anymore, but he just can't resist the temptation to, you know, take a pot shot at the government in Kiev. So their office reported this tweet as news on their website. Yeah? And the next thing you know, it's spreading through the social networks, and it's become fact among the Russian-speaking half of the population.
And it does seem that's occurred quite a lot, and it becomes fact very quickly. And it's the old scenario of people believing what they want to believe because it fits in with their perspective, basically.
And at the moment, they're very willing to believe the darkest possible version of anything that happens. There was a car found early this morning outside or near the city limits of Luhansk, and the car was riddled with bullets, and inside the car were a man and a woman, it seems husband and wife. There has been no investigation, and there is no real indication yet of how these two people came to die in their car. However, on the Russian social networks, it has already been concluded that the military killed them in cold blood because they wanted to leave the city. Yeah. And that's it. So people just say it, somebody says it, and then it becomes fact.
Yeah, and no, I noticed that, and that applies to both sides, to
yes,
people,
absolutely.
to pro, and for ease, I call them pro-Ukrainians, pro-Russians. It's probably not technically correct because some people have already been upset by that terminology, but it just simplifies things a bit.
I agree. It is difficult to know exactly how to refer to the various parties involved in this, but yeah, I mean, they will just report something without evidence. It will spread like wildfire, and we're talking about millions of people who believe something when there's no basis for this belief, and it's just getting worse. It's really ratcheting up since the fire in Odessa. But look, I think the biggest problem at the moment is that there is a real will for war in Ukraine. I mean, the US has played a role, Russia has played a role, of course, the EU as well. They're all in there. I think Yanukovych played a role. Arguably, some of the stupid decisions that the government in Kiev have made. But look, if the people who are going to make this war start are Ukrainians themselves, because a significant percentage of them seem to want it. There are negotiable solutions, without any doubt at all, but too many people just don't want a negotiated solution. They're ready for a war.
And they're so ready to be manipulated.
They absolutely are. Yeah, I think it's really easy to stir them up because there's something in the country at the moment. It's like a social disease that they want to get out in the street and be covered in blood, and as long as that goes on, it's not going to nothing's going to work. No negotiated solution can work. We're looking at a Balkan-style situation, and I don't think it's going to stop unless more people want it to. Some obviously do, but there are too many who don't at this point.
Yeah, so the ones that don't want a war in Ukraine, I think they really need to gather together, stand up, and make their voices heard. Like start taking to the streets themselves, calling for peace. A bit like during the 70s with the peace movement and stuff. We need the hippie Ukrainians to come out.
Though I don't know how that would be received. There was an incident a few months ago in Russia where there was a peace protester on the streets of St. Petersburg. He was just standing on the side of the street with a sign that said "Peace to the world," and he got spat on, beaten, and then moved on by the police.
And that probably sums up the problems of the entire world, really, at the moment.
Yes, yeah. So it's for all of those reasons, I think it's a really stupid war. All war is stupid, but this one is monumentally stupid. So
and yet it looks from what I observed in Odessa, it looks inevitable. I don't see how at least a civil war in Ukraine is going to be stopped because of this mentality. You can't change a mentality overnight, so it seems inevitable. Whether it'll merge into World War III, that remains to be seen, but I can't see how this is going to be stopped.
I think you're right, but I really hope you're wrong. You know, for all my friends in Ukraine, I hope that you're wrong. I don't want to see any of them splattered on a street.
Absolutely, so, and I hope I'm wrong too, but just saying what I saw, you know.
Let's hope for the best.
Okay, and you were also investigating another topic this week. What topic was that?
I was on a very marginally lighter note. I've been looking a bit into this silver orbs phenomenon because, as far as I understand, there have been some fresh sightings recently. Is that right?
I think there's regular sightings of these silver orbs, but I think there have been some recently. But to be honest, it seems like they're observed quite regularly, sort of, you know, every month or two.
They certainly are, and they've been around for a long time. If you look into the history of them, it goes back to, well, at least to the last 2 years of World War II, when they were quite regularly buzzing military pilots, you know, both the Allies and the Axis powers. And World War II pilots reported various kinds of UFOs. When I say UFO, by the way, I mean just literally a flying object that can't be identified. I'm not necessarily meaning an alien craft.
Oh, absolutely. You know, and that's nearly always the case. I mean, if someone says UFO, it does mean unidentified. It doesn't have to mean aliens, you know. And we'll probably try and discuss that a little bit in a minute. But yeah, I mean, if it's unidentified, it's unidentified, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the silver orbs were one kind of these unidentified craft, and collectively the pilots in World War II nicknamed them Foo Fighters, which is a phrase I'm sure you've heard.
It is. Actually, I much preferred Nirvana myself.
Me too. Actually, it was a specific squadron that came up with the nickname. They were called the 415th Night Fighter Squadron, and the original term they used was "fucking Foo Fighters."
Okay, I can see why that one didn't stick so easily.
Obviously, they were a bit concerned, you know, because these you had airplanes going out on missions, and then these weird crafts, you know, either flaming red balls or silver spheres or whatever, following them home after missions and performing all kinds of amazing maneuvers. I mean, they couldn't be outrun by any fighters. They couldn't be shot down. Not a single one was shot or hit. An interesting thing about this is that at the time when all that was happening, it was definitely not a secret. That all of the secrecy about UFOs came later. You know? So in December of 1944, for example, the Supreme Allied Command actually released a press statement about UFOs. You know? They were saying it's a German weapon, though they had to retract that later because German and Japanese pilots were also reporting them, they found out. And there were major articles in newspapers and Time magazine and so on. There's a great one in an Italian national newspaper from 1945. It's a full-page spread, and it says, "Government creates first flying disc," and it has a blueprint of a UFO printed in the national news. So, you know, at the time, it was very much out there in the open, you know. And after the war, these sightings just kept happening. In fact, there was one occasion in 1952 when there were multiple sightings of these orbs and fireballs around the U.S. National Airport in Washington. And at the same time, because it was near the airport, they all showed up on radar. So the visual sightings and the radar detections directly matched. And apparently, one of the people who was present when all that was happening was John McCain, who ran against Obama in 2008.
Oh, yeah?
So if Senator McCain had won the election in 2008, we'd now have a U.S. president who had seen a UFO.
All right. Okay.
So that would have been interesting. But there was an incident later in 1976, and I think you've seen the film of this. I think you sent it to me. When one of these silver orbs turned up on a video of the Concorde.
That's right. Yeah, that was very interesting. And what did you think of that video?
I thought the video was really interesting, and I found out it was an official British Airways documentary, so it was shot from another BA aircraft. It's kind of hard to say if it's genuine or not, but it doesn't seem like a hoax. There have been a lot of possible explanations, about camera lens problems and so on. But it's very arresting footage. I would say to all the listeners, they should try and find it on YouTube, because it's an interesting video.
I think if you go onto YouTube and just type in Concorde UFO Silver Orb or something like that, you should come across it. Yeah,
definitely. So then we entered this new phase in 1953. By that stage, there had already been 3 committees set up in the US to try and work out what the hell these things were. The first one was in 1946, and the most famous one was Project Blue Book, which I think is quite famous in conspiracy.
That's right. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So there was a huge public interest at that time in the subject of UFOs, and then in 1953, the CIA, was pretty young then, they put together a panel of experts. So physicists, meteorologists, people like this. And they were called the Robertson Panel. And the idea of this was to try and formulate some kind of official response to the UFO phenomenon based on all the findings of these committees like Blue Book. So they took about 6 years' worth of data, right, extensive data, and they looked over it for about 12 hours and then immediately produced a report. And they made some astonishing recommendations. So first of all, they said the vast majority of UFO sightings had simple natural explanations, and the rest probably could be explained with further investigation, but it just wasn't that important. That's what they said after half a day. It's just not that important. Then they went on to say that these reports were a potential danger because they overwhelmed intelligence channels. So the argument was, while investigators were dealing with all of these flying saucers, a real threat to the US might appear, and that it might be reported, but it would potentially be missed. So they recommended that the US Air Force de-emphasize the subject of UFOs and start a debunking campaign. And they suggested getting the mass media involved. Specifically, they named Walt Disney. They felt that Disney could help. They said that psychologists and people in the entertainment industry...
They said that Disney could help.
Disney could help to debunk UFOs, yes.
Right, yeah. I've always been suspicious about Disney because they produce Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake as well.
Yeah, and there's a whole other episode of the program in the Walt Disney CIA theory. Also said psychologists, entertainers, and astronomers should all be brought into the fold and encouraged to ridicule anyone who claimed to see a UFO. Basically,
and that's definitely happened since the 50s, really, because I do remember it during the 50s, and it was taken seriously and investigated, and then ever since then, anyone who says they've seen a UFO, despite the fact hundreds of thousands of people do see them, they're just turned into a laughing stock,
Yeah, and this is a committee representation, supposedly to protect the intelligence community from just an overwhelming number of reports. So the strategy was question the sanity of anyone who says they see one. Last thing, by that time, you already had UFO groups springing up. Like all these groups like MUFON, they were already starting to form. And this Robertson panel, the CIA panel, they suggested that these groups should be placed under surveillance because they could be a potential subversive influence in society.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the question obviously is whether this panel's recommendations were followed up. And there's pretty strong evidence that they were, not just in the next few years, but for decades afterwards, and possibly even up till now.
Yeah, but these days, we're all being listened to, so it doesn't really matter anymore, does it?
Well, this is true. Yeah, why they're listening to us now, who can tell? It could be one of a dozen reasons. But we went from look at these silver orbs, aren't they exciting, and don't we want to know? To look, it's a weather balloon, and if you say it isn't, we're going to put you in an institution. Just all based on this kind of Cold War paranoia about security threats, all that stuff. But 60 years later, we're still seeing UFOs. I mean, it's happening all the time. Here in Ankara, there was a big sighting in 2012. It wasn't a silver orb. It was more like a huge mothership thing, and it just hung over the city for about half an hour before sunset. As usual, there was a really pitiful scientific explanation. There was something called a lenticular cloud, which is a stationary lens-shaped cloud. Right? That was the explanation.
And is there any video of this at all?
There is, and you can see it on YouTube.
What would you have to type in on YouTube? Have you seen the video yourself?
Mm-hmm.
What would you have to...
I would say just type in UFO Ankara 2012.
Okay.
I thought it was not conclusive, but it seemed like an aircraft, let's say an aerial craft, was definitely a better explanation than a cloud.
Okay, so sorry, Ankara, which year?
UFO 2012. It was December of 2012, I think.
Okay.
I would say it's. I can't watch it now, by the way, because YouTube is banned in Turkey. I can get it on campus, but I can't get it outside, so I can't watch it again. But yeah, it is a bit sort of hazy and fuzzy around the edges, like a cloud from what I remember. But I just looked at it and I went, all right, it might not be the mothership, but it's definitely not a fucking cloud.
Well, it seems to have. It seems to have like a cloud-like top part in the shape of a mothership, and then underneath it a very kind of more pronounced whiter ring, which doesn't. I mean, the whole thing together doesn't look like your average cloud. I think it
certainly doesn't.
It's fair to say that. I don't know. I reckon it's probably man-made in some way, but whether it's a man-made cloud, because I've talked about weather modification in this program before. Whether it's something that's created by man using some kind of weather modification machine or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's been quite a bit written on the internet, because I researched it after you mentioned it. There's quite a bit written on the internet about chemtrails in Turkey, so that could relate. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. Anyway, please continue.
Yeah. So the debunkers proposed something called a lenticular cloud, which is a stationary lens-shaped cloud. But this thing appeared on a cloudless day. It was bright orange, and it was definitely not your average cloud. If it looks like anything apart from a spaceship, it looks like something that may be connected to chemtrails. But I don't know, I'm speculating. But thousands of witnesses. And I'm a lifelong skeptic when it comes to unexplained phenomena. I'm an interested skeptic, definitely, but still I tend to be skeptical. But I have to say, this has really been a pattern. I mean, these really lame explanations for really intriguing and bizarre aerial phenomena. Actually, a while ago on a conspiracy website, there was a thread about the weather balloon theory. And it was the usual stuff about UFOs being explained away as weather balloons, blah blah blah. And then a guy got onto the thread and said, "Hi, I actually launch weather balloons for a living," and he explained what you should look for if you're looking for a weather balloon. They have a metallic coloured target in the centre of them to assist in radar detection. So if you're not looking at something with a colour target printed in the middle of it, then you're not looking at a weather balloon.
Yeah, I mean, half the time it's quite obvious that these things aren't weather balloons, but I guess there must be some occasion where a weather balloon is mistaken for a UFO, but most of the time I don't think it's anything to do with that.
I'm sure there are. I briefly thought that I'd seen one in Sydney one time. It turned out to be a Zeppelin. So, obviously you can make errors. But
you can indeed. I once looked out the window and I thought I could see one. Then I realised it was a candle that was reflected in the window from behind me. So yeah, it's very easy.
Yeah. Anyway, so if they're not clouds and they're not weather balloons, then what are they? And here's where we get into the theories. There's the Snellmo's fire theory. Snellmo's fire is a weather phenomenon. It happens when an object naturally discharges electricity into an atmosphere that's already strongly charged. And so you get this stuff created called plasma, and it's luminous, and it can look like a ball lightning or a fireball or a glowing light, various things like this. And it most often happens during thunderstorms or volcanic eruptions because they charge up the atmosphere. So if you introduce something into that kind of environment, like, say, an aeroplane, then you can get these plasma displays, and they're pretty spectacular. But not a hugely convincing explanation, I don't think, because a very, very small percentage of the number of UFO sightings have happened during volcanic eruptions, or thunderstorms. So it's clearly not that. There's another explanation which I think does hold some water, and it's the whole government testing experimental aircraft theory. And you remember a while ago we were talking about information management, and you mentioned that everything goes back to the Nazis. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm afraid I have to tell you again that once again this story goes back to the Nazis.
Okay.
I mentioned at the start, in some cases, the Allied Supreme Command in World War II were concerned that these things might be Nazi weapons. And we know that towards the end of the war, the Nazis did develop some flying machines that were just not like anything that anyone else had developed up to that point. You had the V-1 and the V-2 rockets, you had the first jet fighters, you had a thing called a flying wing, which would turn out to be significant later. They were thinking about aerial propulsion, jet propulsion, and other means of aerial propulsion in a way that nobody else was.
Well, weren't they also looking at anti-gravity machines as well?
They were, and I want to talk about that because that is really interesting. I think that it plays a part in this whole puzzle, definitely. So we know that after the war, some of the scientists who were working on these projects were transferred to the USA as part of this thing called Operation Paperclip. And the official story was that the Americans wanted to prevent the USSR from getting hold of these scientists and their, technological advances. Also, a little less famously, the US also wanted to prevent Britain from getting hold of the technology. So they smuggled a bunch of scientists into the US via Latin America. They sanitized their personal records so that all the connections to the Nazi Party were erased. And then they set them to work in various facilities. And a large number of these guys were rocket scientists and aeronautical engineers. The aeronautics guys mostly ended up at a place called Riots Field, which was a high-security storage facility. And in that facility was stored all of the technology that had been, let's say, captured from the Luftwaffe in the last phase of the war when the Americans occupied Germany. And this definitely was secret technology. This was not just, oh, look, their planes are nice, let's take them. This was the classified stuff. So it was all stored at this place, Wright Field, and then these aeronautical engineers from Germany were brought over to this place. Now, Paperclip continued, actually, until 1990, and altogether, there were about 1,600 scientists involved in it.
Well, one of them ended up on Plum Island as well, I believe.
Really?
He headed the experiment. They started experimenting on animals and on insects on Plum Island in the US, and there is a conspiracy theory that one of the insects escaped from the island when they put some disease inside it, and the nearest city to Plum Island on the coast of the USA is a place called Lyme, and that's where the first case of Lyme's disease occurred.
Oh, really?
And a lot of people say it was because of the little insects they were doing tests on as part of Project Paperclip. As one of the Nazi experimenters actually headed a group on Plum Island. So yeah, there's loads of conspiracies connected to that Project Paperclip. But please, anyway, please do go on.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. I'd not heard about that one, but yeah, Paperclip was huge. And if you ask for an official answer, because Paperclip is acknowledged now, I mean, it's acknowledged that it existed, and the official answer is they were helping the USA become rich, right, by patenting various technologies. So those guys would work on some kind of technological advance, and then they would patent it. And in fact, by the time the project finished, the Operation Paperclip had submitted about $10 billion worth of patents, which really is a fairly significant contribution to the wealth of the USA. Yeah. So that's the official answer. But how does this link back to silver orbs and UFOs and all that kind of stuff? Well, some of the German blueprints from the end of the war were for inventions like disc-shaped aircraft and the flying wing that I mentioned. And in 1947, you had the first big reported flying saucer sighting in America. Yeah. You may have heard of this guy, Kenneth Arnold.
No, I can't say I have.
Okay. Well, he saw 9 craft, and he described them all differently, but he described one as looking like a saucer, hence the term flying saucer.
Okay.
Yeah? Mm-hmm. But the others were shaped differently. You know, there were flying discs, flying wings, and flying orbs. Yeah. So then lots of other reports started surfacing, and these were very similar. Also, very similar to these German aeronautical engineering projects that the Americans had seized. And it seemed, I mean, it seemed almost as though they were so similar that it seemed almost as though somebody else had continued working on these projects, you know, to bring them to fruition. Now, there's also, I think, possibly the most interesting case is a guy called Victor Schauberger. He was an amazingly, let's say, unorthodox and ingenious kind of inventor. Yeah, he's one of those guys, kind of like Nikola Tesla. So Tesla is famous now, yeah, but for a long time he was in that guys who should be more famous category. And I think Schauberger is the same. So to give you an example, he was the first person to propose cold fusion. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So kind of a thinking out of the box guy, right? But he did actually also invent a flying disc. And this is not conspiracy theory. This is just uncontroversial fact. He tested it. It worked. He was actually a naturalist, and he was into this idea of creating something that he called levity. Levity is the opposite of gravity. So he found examples of it in nature, forces which could not fight against gravity like traditional aeronautics, but kind of cancel it out. So he studied water, for example, in great detail, and he found that in certain instances, because of the unique topography of water, it could sometimes acquire this property of levity, the opposite of gravity, a kind of a pushing up force. You know? Mm-hmm. So he reasoned that if you could generate this force inside an aircraft, then you wouldn't need conventional means of power. They just wouldn't be relevant anymore. You'd actually be using nature's own force to escape from all of the normal constraints like G-forces and all that kind of thing. So when we see these films of UFOs and hear accounts of UFOs and strange maneuvers they make, you know, they don't seem to. People often say this. Witnesses say it didn't seem to obey the laws of gravity. Well, according to Schauberger, nature doesn't always obey the laws of gravity because it has an opposing force of its own. Okay, so he produced blueprints for a flying machine, which he said was shaped like a saucer, and ran on this principle of levity. Inside the machine, there was a thing that he called a liquid vortex propulsion system. And in this system, water would be rotated into this kind of twisting oscillation. It was called a colloidal. So this particular rotation pattern of water that you occasionally see in nature, like a vortex. Yeah? And the result of that is this immense buildup of energy. Suddenly, the water frees itself from gravity, and you get an enormous levitation force. Yeah? And this was what powered his machine, which worked.
Was this orb shaped?
It was. This one was also shaped. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now he actually built. There's a report that he wrote a letter to one of his friends. Yeah, talking about an orb design, saying that a prototype of it had been constructed in Nazi Germany during the Second World War using prison labor at the Mauthausen concentration camp. According to the story, in his letter he wrote that the craft actually flew on the 19th of February 1945 near Prague, and in 3 minutes it went from the ground to 45,000 feet.
Wow,
And
that's amazing. Was that the Nazi bell that I've read about, or was that something else?
I'm not sure about the Nazi bell. I think Schauberger does turn up in the Nazi bell theories, but I'm not sure in exactly what connection. Unfortunately, according to Schauberger, the Nazis destroyed the prototype so the Allies wouldn't get hold of it. But still, I think it's extremely intriguing. He wasn't a paperclip scientist, and in biographies, it's said that he refused to work for the Nazis. There was apparently he met Hitler in 1934, and Hitler tried to woo him, but he refused. But that's what his biographers say. And you know,
I think if Hitler tried to woo me, I'd refuse too.
Yeah. But the thing is, this is written by biographies that are just in awe of Schauberger. You know, amongst the people who know him, he's kind of a hero because he had so many ideas that were just so off the scale. You know, but he did spend some time in the USA. He worked for a major aeronautical corporation, and his projects are just so similar to the things that started appearing in the skies in the late 40s, including the Orbs, that it's hard not to suspect a possible link. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of this question about how much knowledge governments have about spheres and orbs and disks, this theory suggests that they know everything. Basically, no little green men required, just some very clever Germans given a big operating budget and amnesty, and that the government knows all there is to know about these unidentified flying objects. And personally, I find this the most convincing explanation. Now, if we talk about the alien theories, there's a big challenge, I think, to be overcome by people who support the alien theories. And basically, it sounds silly, but to paraphrase Douglas Adams, space is big. I mean, the distances that you would need to cross in order to visit another inhabited world, I mean, you count those distances in terms of how many hundreds of years light takes to get to those other worlds. So, you know, if you want to put forward an alien theory convincingly, I mean, I think it is possible.
What about wormholes?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't rule it out, but I think there's three things you need to consider, and you have to do at least one of these things. The first one is you need to show some evidence of a workaround solution for this light speed barrier.
Well, surely that'd be the wormholes, wouldn't it?
Yeah, the wormholes are one theory which looks at that. How can this light speed barrier be broken? Yeah? And we have to acknowledge that we're living in a universe that's existed for 10 billion years longer than our planet has, meaning that there would be a lot of time for civilizations to develop to a point where maybe they would work out a solution like this. So that's possible. Yeah? In my personal opinion, it hasn't been proposed very convincingly yet, but I think that could change. Yeah? We'll see what happens with that. The second thing is you'd have to show evidence that the beings on these crafts had enormous lifespans. You know, because if they did, then it would be worth them investing the time to get here. You know? And again, I think that's theoretically possible. You know, there have been some amazing discoveries about creatures on Earth in the last 20 to 30 years. The creatures that live around the ocean vents, for example, which live for 300, 400 years and don't need oxygen to live. So given the variety of life on Earth, it's possible that, you know, we could find a race of aliens who live for a couple of million years, and therefore spending a couple of thousand years getting to us is worth their time. Again, it hasn't been proven yet, and we'll see what happens with that. Or the third thing, well, sorry, I should say, and the third thing, you'd have to give these guys a really good reason for making the journey. So, you know, in your classic sci-fi stories, it's Martians coming to take over the Earth because they lack a mineral or something like that. We need a good reason why they would come, because it's not an easy journey to make, even if you're using wormholes.
But if someone, say, for example, saw some aliens or saw, I mean, there have been cases where people have not only seen an unidentified object, they've actually seen the aliens. I mean,
yes.
Now, assuming they're telling the truth, surely if they've seen one and they've seen an alien staring them back in the face, they don't need a reason. They don't need a reason. For them, who cares about the reason? They're staring at one in the face. So.
Well, yes, that is very true. But I think, as an explanation for unexplained aerial phenomena, it would be very helpful to know why if these things are coming from another planet, what are they doing when they get here? You know, these
maybe they're just having a rest.
They might, yes. It's a truck stop.
But if I was an alien, I wouldn't stay here too long.
Well, yeah. In World War II, for example, these silver orbs and red flaming balls, they seem to be checking out the aircraft technology that we had, and the same with the Concorde video and many other videos. This is fairly typical of their behaviour. They examine aircraft which have been invented on Earth. So, is that a reason? Is there something in that? We don't know, but we might know. We'll see what happens. With that.
We have to keep an open mind. It could be that one nation on this Earth has developed, or even more than one nation has developed, extremely sophisticated technology that they're not telling anyone about. I mean, I've seen another video on the internet showing a missile launch. It seems very authentic as well. A missile launch, and then a little silver orb comes alongside the missile and shoots a laser out. And this is this was released by a guy who said he observed it. He was actually part of the missile launch, and it's it's stuff like that. I must admit, when it comes to the alien stories, the thing that actually made me sort of take more notice was the things like the Travis Walton case. Have you heard about that at all?
I've heard about it. I don't know a lot about it.
I mean, what it was I'll briefly go through it. I might talk about it more after our chat, but it was I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 guys who were working in forestry in the USA. Not sure which part of the USA, but they were cutting down trees, and they'd finished for the day, started to drive back home, saw a light in the sky, and they drove towards it, got closer, and they saw a UFO, a disc. This was more of a disc one rather than these silver orbs. And they had lights coming from the bottom of it, and it was quite clearly of some kind of flying machine. It was quite low. Travis Walton was one of the people in the vehicle that day. He got out and started walking towards it, even though his friends told him to stay back because they feared it was dangerous. They could see it was your traditional flying saucer with flashing lights and that kind of thing. Anyway, a beam came out from the bottom of this ship, and it knocked him down. And the other guys in the vehicle were terrified, and their immediate reaction was to drive off. So they drove off, and then they got some distance. They said, "We have to go back. We can't leave him there." And so they drove back, and when they got back, he was gone. So anyway, this is a story you can check out on the internet, basically, because it's very convincing if you watch the documentary story behind with the actual people involved. Because I remember watching, and I can't actually find it. I can find they've done similar ones, but the one I saw, it was the witnesses, the 6 guys talking about what happened, and they were still terrified to this day. A lot of them have lost their jobs over this incident. There's been relationship breakups. I think some of them won't even talk about it anymore. But you could kind of tell they were telling the truth. But anyway, that's not the end of the story. They drove back into town. They tried to tell people what happened. Of course, a lot of people didn't believe them, said they were lying. The police got involved. This is all checkable, by the way. This was a checkable event. The police got involved, and then, of course, eventually they wanted to accuse them of possible murder because this guy is gone. He didn't turn up for a number of days, and they had to go and they agreed to take lie detector tests. I think one of them refused to take the lie detector test, but the others took the test and passed. with their UFO story, because they were just basically being laughed at by the police. So they brought in an expert, did lie detector tests. The ones that agreed to take it, they all passed. That they at least believed they had seen some UFO and that what they were saying had happened. Anyway, a number of days later, I can't remember how many days, might have been 5 days, let's say, Travis Walton turned up. He turned up, called somebody from a phone box. It was raining. They went out and got him, brought him back, and everybody wanted to know what had happened, and he gave his account, which is basically being taken up inside a ship, and inside the ship they were doing some experiments. He was terrified again. He tried to escape. There was one person that he described on the ship was of human appearance, but the others were clearly not of human appearance, and he described them. Anyway, he obviously the case then went on. He was then accused of wasting police time, that this was all a lie. So everybody took lie detector tests, including himself, and they all passed. And anyway, this went on for years and years. They all stuck to their stories. As I said, it didn't turn out well for them all. I mean, by sticking to this story, a lot of them lost jobs or were ridiculed, and anyone who is interested in it, just check out the story. And I would recommend try to find a good documentary online where the people involved are talking, because I have to say they're quite convincing. Some of these people, some of them don't want to talk about it. It's clear that they're being dragged into something they don't want to talk about. But have a look at that case. I would recommend anyone who thinks that UFOs, there can't be aliens. And I'm not saying there's a possibility somebody's lying, but it's a very convincing story when you've got 6 people all saying the same thing, passing lie detector tests. If you listen to them, some of them are clearly quite scared about what happened that day. Travis Walton still sticks to his story. That was a very convincing case for me anyway. So I recommend anyone who's still curious about finding out more, check into that.
Can I say, I think that a lot of abduction accounts are very convincing as well. There was a phenomenon, and maybe still is, I don't know, but there was a phenomenon in the US where cases of sexual assault were reported as cases of abduction, alien abduction, I mean. And that was quite a widespread phenomenon, and much the same way as cases of sexual assault were reported as cases of satanic ritual abuse. The two things seemed to blossom around the same time, and it was. I mean, the theory is that this is a result of the person who is the victim of the sexual assault is sexually abused by somebody who they love and trust, and cannot comprehend that person would sexually abuse them, and so has a fantasy involving either Satanists or Little Green Men or whoever it might be. However, that aside, I think there are a very great number of convincing accounts of abduction. Yeah, so it is. It's an issue that. How can I say this? I would say that the jury is still out, but I think that the government aeronautical research thing, the alien theory, there's certainly evidence for both. Let's say that. I wanted to also mention, just lastly, one thing that I like. I don't think this is the most likely theory, but this is a theory that comes up every so often. It's an alien-based theory, and it's we could call it the forfeited stewardship theory. So, in other words, we've forfeited our stewardship of the planet, and aliens, having seen what a mess we've made of it, have decided to do things like preserving samples of life on Earth so that the planet can be replenished when we're gone. I am not saying that I'm going with this theory, but I do find it somehow very appealing.
Do you mean that aliens are living amongst us? Is that what you're saying?
I mean to say that that perhaps these abductions are not happening only to humans but to other species as well, and that there is a vast gene bank. This is the theory. There's a vast gene bank somewhere else in the galaxy of earthly genes, because these aliens have seen the planet is on the road to disaster, and in much the same way that zoos preserve some species that have become extinct or are about to become extinct in the wild, and also they take samples from captive animals in the hope of perhaps reintroducing those animals later when conditions improve. There's a lot of zoo programs for which that is the goal. That tigers are a case in point. In much the same way, this theory goes, that there is another race watching over the Earth thinking, oh my God, what are you guys doing down there? We have to create a gene bank so that when you finally get through this phase of incredible destruction and the Earth has a chance to recover, we might be able to repopulate it with some of the species you've destroyed. I know it's an incredibly outlandish theory. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying it's quite appealing.
Yeah, and we'll always look at all theories. I mean, I saw a documentary the other night actually. Another thing that's worth checking out is a guy called Phil Schneider, who was basically saying that aliens are already here and they're living underground. Mm-hmm. And the curious thing about his case was it was him and a number of friends who were working in construction, and they were working on these underground bases for the military. And they came across these aliens by mistake, and there was deaths involved. And anyway, he had a group of friends, and one by one they were killed mysteriously. Mm-hmm. And I was watching the documentary, and Phil Schneider's actually talking in this documentary, and he's saying all his friends have been killed over this, and that he believes someone's following him. And then, sure enough, documentary ends, and Phil Schneider wound up dead himself. Found I think hung, or some kind of ligature around his neck, mm-hmm. and it was put down as suicide. But his friends and his wife believe it wasn't suicide. By the way, I'm talking about cover-ups and suicide. I read today. I was looking at conspiracy theories and people had been killed under mysterious circumstances, and one of them had 2 bullet holes to the head, and it was put down by the doctor as suicide. And I just thought, how do you do that?
That's a very determined suicide, isn't it?
It is, yeah. He didn't get it right first time, so he just made sure the second time.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was trepanning. You know about self-trepanning?
Oh, what's that?
Opening a hole in the front of the skull in order to open the third eye.
I wouldn't recommend this at home at all to any listeners.
It was a kind of a fad in the, let me think, the 70s perhaps. There is footage around. I don't know where you could find it. You may find it on the internet, but it's quite graphic footage of people just drilling into their skulls. It was definitely like I said, a bit of a fad for a while, but I guess it's not the kind of thing that's going to survive for a long time. You know,
I can see why it might not have caught on anyway.
Yeah.
Another case I wanted to talk about was the Rendlesham Forest incident. Mm-hmm. This was a UFO that landed in Rendlesham Forest in the UK on a military base. I think it was a US base actually. We do have some US bases over here in the UK. And
do you? No, you can't. That can't possibly be true.
Yeah, some of them aren't secret either. No, we have some US bases over here, and I don't know if Rendlesham Forest is one of them. But anyway, the UFO was seen by military commanders. It was seen by people based there, and it's all been recorded. And basically, I saw a documentary where the commander of the airbase said this needs to be talked about and investigated, because we can't have mysterious objects dropping into air bases and it's violating all the defences of that airbase.
Yeah,
and we need to find out what this was. And actually, the Rendlesham Forest UFO was supposed to have hieroglyphics on the outside. That was
mm-hmm.
The witness statement said he saw hieroglyphics on the outside of the aircraft. And
sorry to interrupt. That has been reported quite a few times, by the way.
It has actually, yeah.
Unusual symbols on the sides of these.
Unusual hieroglyphs or something, and that actually I think was they had unusual hieroglyphs on the Nazi bell. So everything does seem to go back to the Nazis.
One of these days we will talk about the Nazis and Fanta.
We will one day. So shall we call it a day on this subject?
Yeah, let's. I just want to wrap up by saying I think there is I think that the alien theory has a lot to recommend it, but at this stage I think I'm going with the top secret government aircraft theory.
I think personally I'm going to go for both.
Fair enough.
Just so that basically I won't be wrong because I'll have covered both bases.
Good strategy.
Okay, well take it easy and we'll check in again with you soon. Okay.
Okay. Thanks very much for having me on again, Scott.
Yeah. No. Thank you.
Okay. See you.
Okay. Bye.
So we touched on UFOs there, but I wanted to talk to another guest, researcher and UFO witness, who can hopefully talk a little bit more about the subject. We'll go now to Ben, somewhere in London. Ben has been interested in the UFO phenomenon for many years and has witnessed a silver orb UFO. So he'd be ideal to talk to you about the particular subject we're talking about today. Ben, hi and welcome to Truth Sentinel.
Hi Scott, it's a pleasure to be here and to be invited on your show.
You're most welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'm currently an early years worker working in the UK. I've studied planetary science and astrophysics at Bristol University, and I had a UFO experience when I was younger.
Yeah, can you tell us about that experience? How old were you at the time?
I was 7 at the time, but I did share the experience with my brother who was older.
And what actually happened?
We were actually playing in our house, and all of a sudden we noticed there was an eerie silence. We looked out the window and noticed this orb hovering above the road, across the road. We looked at the orb for some time. It must have been at least 5 minutes. During that time it just didn't move at all, and we were completely awestruck by it.
Whereabouts were you at the time? Was this in the UK?
This was in London, in fact, during the summer. It was a bright, clear day. There didn't seem to be any kind of other aeroplanes around at the time, and the orb was just hovering there. It was completely seamless. There was no emissions from it, no lights.
Were you already looking out the window at the time, or did it catch your eye or something?
No, we were actually playing, but we noticed this eerie silence, and it was almost a feeling of somebody watching us almost. So I don't know what drew our attention to it, but we noticed this UFO, and it just blew our minds really.
How long did you watch it for?
I mean, I guess it might have been 2 to 3 minutes. It kind of felt like 10 minutes at the time, but at the age of 7, you don't really have a concept of these things too much. But it was a significant length of time, enough for us to view it, to see exactly what it looked like, and what, if any, movement it made. And in this scenario, in this case, it didn't move one bit.
And were you talking to each other at the time, or did you just watch in silence?
We just said, wow, what have we seen there? And we stared at it for a number of minutes. Following that, we ran downstairs to tell our mum. It must have taken us about 5 seconds to get down the stairs, open the front door, and it was gone. And as I said, it was a bright, clear day. There wasn't any clouds in the sky. And the UFO was actually only across the road, hovering above a fir tree, which must have been about 20 meters. So we got a really clear view of it.
And you told your mum about this experience. What did she think?
Yeah, we called her out at the time, and we said, Mum, come out and look at this thing. And by the time we got out, like I said, it was gone. So unfortunately, she didn't get to share the experience that we had, but it's one that stayed with me for the rest of my life, and hence the planetary science and the research that I've done into UFOs since then.
As well as seeing the UFO, did you have any sensation? Did you feel anything? Can you tell us a bit about what went through your mind at the time?
As I said, it was very much like not only were we watching it, but it was watching us. And I don't know how or why I can say that, but it's just like the old feeling that you might get, like somebody's watching you, you turn around and you kind of see that somebody is. That's as much as I can explain, really. But as I said about the UFO itself, it was completely seamless. The only way that I could describe it is it was comparable to a ball bearing, one that you might find in a wheel on a bicycle. but rather than shiny, it was completely dull.
And what sort of size would you say it was?
I'd approximate it, because it was hovering above the fir tree, and it was wider than that. It must have been 2 to 3 meters in diameter.
Did it give off any sound at all?
None whatsoever. There was no sound, there was no light, no emissions.
No movements?
No movements whatsoever. It was completely motionless for the length of time that we viewed it for, which was a number of minutes.
And what did your brother, what has your brother said about this in the years since?
We've talked about it, and it's kind of something that we don't talk about too often. I think he was kind of a bit more freaked out by it than myself, and although I couldn't say that I knew what it was, but I was familiar with military aircraft and conventional aircraft, and it was nothing like that. And in 1982, as far as I'm aware, we didn't have the capabilities to levitate, keep an object motionless for a number of minutes. So I could only ever believe, I have believed that it may well have been not from this world, really. And
obviously had a big effect on your life, and you became very interested in UFOs. Did you start researching silver orbs in particular?
Not specifically. I really got, like I said, the impression that it wasn't from this world, so I was very interested from that moment on in different experiences, although it wasn't really till I was older that I started looking into it. I have come across different sphere of UFOs on the internet. There's one particular case in Russia of a similar type of UFO, although in that occasion, which has been filmed, I think you can get it on YouTube, it's moving around a lot, up and down and hovering almost in an erratic way, whereas what I experienced, like I said, seemed much more controlled.
So Ben, what other UFO events have particularly impressed you?
Well, as well as the Travis Walton and Rendlesham Forest cases you've mentioned, listeners obviously know about the Roswell case in 47, as well as perhaps the Washington Flap case in 52, which was a massive case at the time. There's also Barney and Betty Hill, who had an abduction in 1961, as well as some of your listeners may know about the nuclear missile base that was disabled 1967 in the USA, and perhaps more recently the Mexican military encounter in which they videoed I believe 11 UFOs in 2004. Similarly, Gary McKinnon, who in 2002 hacked into military computer files looking for free energy and UFO cover-ups, but he came across some information relating to non-terrestrial officers that was in throughout the military and government, as well as other officials. And as well as that, he also found evidence about USA having space fleets in which they've got their own crafts that can fly interstellar space travel as we know it right now.
And he must have upset them to a certain extent, because they wanted to extradite him to the US, and it was only a last-minute effort by politicians in the UK that stopped that happening. I mean, he's supposed to have Asperger's.
Yeah, he's got Asperger's syndrome, and I guess that may have been part of the reason why he was able to be let off. I mean, he's just thankful that he was, and that the information got out to us, because it's really compelling.
But how much information really did get out? I mean, I'd love to get him on this show at some point and see if he can talk to us, but I've got a feeling he's been told that he can't talk too much about it, because I haven't heard an awful lot about what he saw.
No, neither myself. I mean, it's gone quite quiet since it all came out. Hopefully you'll get an opportunity to do that, Scott, because, I think it would really be beneficial for the public to hear a little bit more about it.
Well, I have tweeted him, that's all I can say at the moment.
Well, good luck with that, Scott.
One more question for you before you go. I know you're a busy man. What do you say to people who say UFOs are most likely advanced military craft originated from Earth and not necessarily of alien origin?
Well, I can kind of understand that. You know, you probably find that quite a lot of cases that it is military craft, but it's my belief that these are reverse engineered from originally alien crafts. You know, going back to the Roswell incident in 1947, I think governments across the world, particularly the USA, Germany, as well as England and Russia, have had access to these alien crafts. Like I said, reverse engineered them and created their own. And so you'll probably find that, you know, it's a mix really, but like I said, it's my belief that aliens are here, and some of those alien crafts that you see are from alien origins, and some are from military as well. I just think it's a little far-fetched to think that we're the only life form in this universe, with such a small speck in such a massive place, and there's just got to be other life forms out there. And with some of the information coming through, you know, something like what Bob Lazar's come out and said, that these crafts are able to traverse interstellar space at a blink of an eye, and light speed is not necessary in order to be able to do this. So, you know, anyone that's kind of thinking that, you know, it would take millions and hundreds of thousands of years at light speed to get here, you know, I don't believe that's true. It's just a question of...
Okay, now the UFO subject is such a huge subject, and we're only just lightly touching on it today. I hope we can go in more detail in the future. Maybe you'll come back and discuss some other topics to do with this same subject.
Yeah, I'd love to. If any of your listeners have got any questions that they want answering, or they want me to even look into some cases in more detail, I'd love to come back, Scott. It's been a pleasure to be here.
So nice of Ben to join us today. Thanks for that. Topics coming up in future episodes could include conspiracies, cover-ups, more on UFOs, other mysteries such as the Dyatlov Pass incident. If you're not familiar with that, some climbers mysteriously died in the Ural Mountains. Best if you read the story, because we'll go into it in depth at some point. Who knows what else we'll talk about. Anything where the truth about what happened is not yet agreed upon or is being covered up. This week, I've listened a little bit to Alex Jones, Hagman and Hagman. John B. Wells, you're in my bad book a bit this week after affecting our channel and cutting down the number of listeners we've got. It's a long story, but he put his channel put a block on our channel due to a misunderstanding about an advert I had to support Caravans of Midnight. Please subscribe both to Caravans of Midnight and to Scott Sentinel, because then you'll be prompted when a new episode comes up. We'll eventually be moving everything across to the Scott Sentinel channel. I think that's going to be the main channel, because a lot of the features on Caravans of Midnight are no longer usable. This is the section where we usually talk about economic markets, sports, space or weather, those kind of things. One thing I wanted to talk about, Europe has committed 7.5 billion euros this decade to launch a fleet of environmental monitoring satellites, which they call Sentinels. So I thought it was very appropriate to mention them. They're going to have specific roles viewing the Earth using a range of observing techniques. Are they going to be spying on us, or are they going to be spying on the weather? I'm always slightly suspicious. The Sentinels fit in with what the EC calls its Copernicus program. Sounds like something from a James Bond movie. This week's sport, weather and finance section. We're going to listen a bit more to Mark Cockin, who also did comment on the weather and its connection to finance. That should be interesting. He spoke about the global banking elite last week, and also expressed his religious views, which not everyone would agree upon, but we'll have a religious debate on another show. That's always sure to ignite a lot of debate. Anyway, here's a little bit more from Mark Cockin.
Do the global warming issues have any connection to finance? For example, I heard Al Gore has made millions from companies connected to climate change related businesses.
Absolutely. I mean, the example you quote of Al Gore has to be the most apparent one. But yes, of course it's related to finances. When you regard finance as a weapon of control, it's certainly related in that way. And let's face it, nations are being taxed to the hilt with their carbon taxes and all the other things that they're planning to impose on the basis of a hypothesis that doesn't stand up to scrutiny, and that is that carbon dioxide is responsible for one of these changes, when it's not. It's quite provably something that's happening in the solar system and has happened before. We're going through a cycle that's long recorded, and people are waking up to this now. So how can it be anything else other than a financial tool for control? If you follow me, that's what lies behind the global warming myth. Now the weather is changing and so on, but as I say, that's not down to carbon dioxide induced global warming, especially when water vapour is something like 100 times more powerful as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. It's like, come on, at what point do you get your head out your ass?
And that's a perfect sentence to finish today's interview. Get your head out of your ass. Thanks for coming on Truth Sentinel today. To finish today on a lighter note, the deepest ever living fish have been discovered, scientists believe. UK-Japanese team found the shoal of fish at a depth of about 4.8 miles, 7.7 kilometers, in the Japanese trench in the Pacific. And they captured some of it on film. They were using remote-operated landers, which have been designed to withstand the pressures of that kind of depth and to comb the world's deepest depths of the oceans for marine life or for any kinds of life. You know, a lot of people, we talked about UFOs today and looking for life on other planets and in the skies, but, you know, there's a lot of life that we haven't discovered on our own planet. They found these fish, and apparently it's the first time they've been able to observe these fish. And someone actually said they were surprisingly cute. I'm going to try and pronounce the Latin name of these fish. They're called Pseudodoliperus amblystomoposis. And you'll have to look that up if you think I pronounced it wrong. So we're still discovering life on our own planet. There like to be a lot more hidden creatures beneath the sea, maybe in the jungles, who knows. Some people believe we have other species living actually amongst us as well. That's another story. I was trying to stay non-conspiratorial, but failed dismally. Anyway, always looking for sponsors, advertisers, financiers. Please contact us. We'd love to be able to invest in more research and travel. So please get in touch via Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube email. Scott Sentinel, you can do a search for. Our email is actually scottsentinel9@gmail.com. That's scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Contact us for any reason. If you want to come on the show, or if you want to help in some way, or if you want to invest. Let us know how the sound is coming through, any ways we can improve. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening to Truth Sentinel today. Goodbye. Hello, welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Today's date is the 11th of May 2014. Welcome to all listeners. Truth Sentinel is now back in London after a number of weeks in Ukraine, a country which is rapidly deteriorating. As I was leaving Odessa, actually, in the taxi, there was crowds marching down the street, chanting. Apparently they actually went on to the police station and demanded some prisoners be released. Since I've heard things have quietened down in Odessa a bit, but I don't think it's over yet. Civil war seems inevitable. Today's news. Still on the subject of Ukraine, pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine holding self-rule referendums.
And apparently, according to the BBC, there are chaotic scenes at polling stations, with it being very badly organised. But of course, if you read Russia Today, then it will give you a far more positive view of events. And who's telling us the truth? It's probably somewhere in the middle, I would say. I would expect the result to be for East Ukraine to go towards Russia. And it will be interesting to see the reaction from Putin, who's distanced himself from this poll. More again on Ukraine later. Ceasefire has been violated in Sudan, only hours after it was supposed to come into effect. Hundreds of people across Vietnam have protested against China's role in a dispute over there on the sea. Apparently that's the largest rallies of their kind recently in that communist country. Other news this week. The Daily Mail in the UK printed yet another nauseating story about the Queen and how hard she works, and showing a photo with a caption underneath about her heavy tiara that she had to wear, which isn't that heavy at all actually. And if it is, well, how about just take it off then? It's not so difficult. She was attending some ceremony that happens every 8 years or so to award some or create some new knights. I don't know, it's all rather ridiculous. The article was commenting on her arduous long-haul flights abroad. Now, no offence, but if she was in economy class, fine. A long flight abroad could be quite arduous, but somehow I don't think her flights are going to be arduous. She's going to have 5-star treatment. She'll have the best food. She'll have probably a seat big enough for a queen to sit on, probably even a throne on there. Wouldn't be surprised. So, less of the arduous work she has to do, please. I mean, it's an outdated concept as far as I'm concerned, and only continues to be popular in the UK due to the continuous brainwashing of the masses that the Queen is good value for money, and the royal family, because of the amount of tourists they bring in. Tourists never get to meet the Queen, incidentally. And so this tourist service could be maintained at 1/1000th of the cost, just by having someone dress up as the Queen or something. I am being a bit flippant, but enough said on that anyway. Other news this week: Nigerian girls that were kidnapped. A lot of people jumping on the bandwagon now. John Kerry offers US support. President Obama and his wife Michelle are heartbroken. I really wish someone would comfort them, because I hate to think of Obama and Michelle heartbroken. I mean, they must be crying themselves to sleep. I really don't like it when they use those words like that cheaply, because I doubt very much if they're heartbroken. And maybe the families of a daughter who's been taken might be heartbroken. I actually find it hard to believe that Obama has any way of being heartbroken or showing empathy, because I say that after watching his speech after returning from Malaysia, where he joked about flight MH370, referred to it a number of times, and that was after coming back from Malaysia, so it's pretty insensitive. If he really cared about missing people, there was 239 missing passengers on that plane, so why is that such a big joke, something you can joke about at an after-dinner speech? Then he joked about NSA surveillance, like that's all a big joke, Actually, I and many other millions of people are actually really upset that he thinks it's fine for the NSA to spy on the entire world. What's his business? What I'm writing, or what I'm saying on the phone, or what I'm typing into my computer? It's none of his business. I don't like him making jokes about it. Also joking about his healthcare reform, which I know isn't popular with a lot of people. And then, to top that, for his finale, joking about President Putin. Somehow I don't think in the years of Kennedy and Khrushchev, they would have been cracking juvenile jokes about each other, because they knew the seriousness of the situation they're in. We're on the brink of World War III, and he's making jokes about Putin's chest. I mean, it's just... I actually think we're in danger with him in charge. I think we're in danger. But I'm not just talking about America. I'm talking about the UK as well. Cameron has also been saying some stupid things this week, also about the missing girls. And Anyway, I mean, I thought Obama's speech was undiplomatic, unprofessional, and insensitive. But anyway, that's my opinion. What do you think about that? Let me know. And I mean, I saw Michelle's video as well. She was reading from a teleprompter. Now, if you want to sound sincere, or if you want to look sincere, it's best just to talk from the heart, you know. If you start just looking at words on a teleprompter, and it did seem like she was putting a fake I'm concerned face on. You know, politicians and their friends and partners tend to do. I mean, way more than 500,000 people go missing every year in the UK and the USA. You know, they're actually in a position where they can do something about that. So they're just using it for some political gain or for some reason, you know. I mean, I've heard they're going to be moving security services in to try and help, which probably means they're planning some kind of operation over there. I mean, Cameron said that he rang the Nigerian president to offer anything that would be helpful and agreed to send out a team of counter-terrorism and intelligence experts to work alongside the bigger American team that's going out there. I suggest they're out there for some other reason, or definitely for some ulterior motive, because the moment it seems like the president and other politicians care, it's the moment to be concerned. What are they actually up to? Putin visited Crimea this week and gave yet another display of Russian military power. Killer robots are to be debated at the UN. I think they're going to be discussing the ethics of whether automated killing should be allowed. It should be a very short meeting. The answer should probably be no, but I'm sure they'll draw up guidelines on situations where it's ethically right to kill someone with a robot. It'll probably start with exceptional circumstances a robot can be used to kill with someone, and then eventually, as laws are relaxed, which they always are, they'll just be picking people off on the streets. Other news of more of an astronomical nature. Sibling. It's a misunderstanding, but you know it has affected this channel. We've lost a number of listeners due to all the subscribers basically not seeing uploads. So please resubscribe to Scott Sentinel channel, which you should find information about on the previous Caravans of Midnight channel. And if you want to say hello or come and say hello on the show, please contact us. There's various ways to do that: Twitter, Facebook, and just contacting us via the email section on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about UFOs for the first time. We're just touching on this subject today. It won't be in depth, but it will be an introduction, and we'll be focusing a little on the silver orb or silver sphere phenomenon. There's different shapes of UFOs, as well as the saucer-shaped UFOs, and many people have also seen the silver orb style of UFOs, and there's a documentary actually, if you want to find out more about it, called The Enigma of Flying Spheres. That's just one documentary, which you can find on a very good website called topdocumentaries.com. Another good website is documentaryheaven.com, where you can find lots of conspiracy documentaries and, well, just documentaries in general. Today we'll also discuss Ukraine and the ongoing media wars and the effect it's having on Ukraine. I can certainly I can give you some perspectives on Ukraine, having lived there for a number of years, both in West Ukraine and sort of more central, southern, eastern Ukraine, in Odessa. I've just returned from Odessa and still got friends on all sides over there. It's my opinion that it's really difficult to give an exact account of what's going on there, because there's so many parties involved, including Russia, the US, the EU, probably others, and secret services from those countries and more. There's a report on RT, Russia Today, and German media that Blackwater US troops are also on the ground in Ukraine. That certainly wouldn't surprise me at all. There's business interests playing a part. For example, Gazprom, of which Putin has at least a 5% stake, but probably more via friends. There is basically, it's all about West Ukraine, which is fiercely nationalistic, and which a lot of people would say were responsible for the overthrow of the government of Yanukovych. Sun has been found 110 light years from Earth. That report from RT, Russia Today. The Sun could have a sibling, according to researchers at the University of Texas. They believe this star was born from the same cloud of gas as our Sun, and this could give astronomers fresh ideas on how life on Earth started. I'm fairly skeptical personally on that we know actually much about how life started, or much about the universe. I do think in this day and age we think we're a lot more intelligent than we really are, but that's just my personal opinion. Not everyone agrees with that, I know. We'll be looking to the skies for other parts of today's program. I also noticed on Twitter, my Twitter page, that a Colorado witness in Centennial reported seeing a silent missile-shaped objects with lights that moved toward ground level about late evening a number of days ago on May the 8th, I think it was, this year. And this came from the Mutual UFO Network, otherwise known as MUFON. And we're going to be talking more on the subject of UFOs imminently. Just to mention last week's episode. Remember, this is a weekly show. I do try to get this out within 7 days of the last one. It has sort of slipped a bit to different days. I know it used to be Wednesday, then Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It just depends on other work commitments as well. But I think I'm going to aim for the weekend. I think the weekend's a good time to do this, because there's I usually have some free time. We're getting more and more people on the Truth Sentinel team. We're getting researchers, sound people who've offered to help, and thanks for people that are contacting us to offer to help. Anyone else who can, please let me know. Any guests that would like to come on, please contact us. Last episode we talked about Ukraine. We had reviews on documentaries about PSYOPs, Glenn Greenwald, Edward Snowden. Then we had our guest Mark Cocking talking about the global banking elite, and there'll be more from him today. He'll be talking a bit more about that and also commenting on the weather. Remember to leave any comments in the comments section underneath the video on the Scott Sentinel YouTube channel. I've actually had to move channels, as I mentioned, due to a block from Caravan to Midnight.